A sudden crack in the system can lead to fear, and fear leads to panic, and panic leads to a bank run. And with everything online these days, those bank runs can happen at the speed of a Twitter post.
Satoshi had just a beautiful vision, a beautiful dream, and that was, what if we didn't have to trust the banks? And what if we didn't have to save our life savings in a fiat currency that's collapsing in value?
What could be so pernicious about ordinary banking that Henry Ford believed the truth could spark a sudden revolution?
A Beirut bank burns.
According to the Federal Reserve, 94% of American adults are banked in some form or another. But how many really understand how banking works and what actually happens to your hard-earned money when you deposit it at a bank? The bank doesn't hold it. It lends it out or uses it to purchase things like government securities.
Whether it's a country, whether it's a company, the knock-on effects due to counterparty risk lead to leverage unwinds. You can set your watch by it. It's that simple.
Professional risk managers like Greg Foss are keenly aware of something most ordinary people never stop to consider: counterparty risk. In other words, can you trust your counterparty in a financial transaction, in this case your bank, to not be in danger of defaulting on its obligation to you as the customer?
A lot of this is a confidence game. That's kind of the whole game of fractional reserve banking. These institutions are inherently unstable. I've described it as basically like we're all just casually storing our money in leveraged bond funds. If you phrase like that, would you say, is that a low risk investment? People would say, no, of course not. But that's what we all just casually use for our savings.
Fractional reserve banking.
We're backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government.
That is, until people stop trusting the full faith and credit of a government that lives by the money printer. Bear's guarantees may or may not be that reassuring, depending on how much faith one puts in the government to not create bubbles and moral hazards in the first place. After all, these statements were made before this latest banking crisis. And the big question is, how systemic will this one turn out to be?
It's just one of the challenges of having an actively managed financial system and their ongoing cycle of putting out fires that they themselves caused. For example, after the dot-com bubble, that was a mild recession by most accounts. Unemployment rate and GDP contraction were pretty mild, and yet the Federal Reserve cut interest to 1%, which encouraged a lot of real estate leverage, and then they rapidly hiked interest rates. And that wasn't the only factor, but that was a contributing factor to the 2008 financial crisis. And we kind of saw a similar, but somewhat less severe dynamic this time.
It does feel a little bit like wash, rinse, repeat. You blow up one bubble, pop it, and then you have to taper it over and hit the money printer again, lower interest rates. We already went to zero. Where does it go from here? How many more times can they pivot again and lower interest rates before at some point we lose all credibility?
Predicting that is basically predicting human behavior, which is challenging.
One universal aspect of human behavior that is all too predictable, unfortunately, is the tendency to make grievous mistakes, or worse, to be flat out corrupt at the expense of everyday working citizens. Loss of trust in the system is happening fast. It's happening in Lebanon, across the European Union, and in our own backyard.
I've lived through 5 of these crises. Started with the LDC debt crisis in 1988, then long-term capital management 1998, 2008, then the COVID crisis, and guess what? This one is the worst of all of them because all you've done is kick the can down the road, or think of it as kicking it to the highest level, the government debt level. There's nowhere else to kick it, people. There's no higher level of leverage than the governments and the sovereigns. So contagion was in 2008, 2009, Bear Stearns and Lehman. Replace that with country XYZ today. It's exactly the same problem.
The problem that we have is a flawed banking system, a fractional reserve banking system, where bankers can lend money that they don't have. And if you go back in time to the United States in the 1850s, that was a capital offence. You could hang for that. And so we've had another disaster. And none of this is actually going to save us from another disaster down the line. It's bound to happen because we haven't addressed the real problems.
Are we watching a systemic collapse of the central banking system here in the United States?
I think we're seeing the onset of the next financial crisis, and there will always be a next financial crisis until the system collapses entirely. I think it's hard to predict, or, is this the last cycle?
One thing is certain, the U.S. will have trouble retaining its position as the world's bank if people don't trust their money is safe in the system. We certainly can't be bailing out banks in 15-year cycles.
I'm basically watching to see any more actions by the Federal Reserve, which is a sad state of affairs because when you look at the financial system, you shouldn't have to look at what one guy is going to decide when he gets out of bed, or one group of people, but that's kind of the nature of the system. It just consolidates towards the center over time. Because we're kind of in the later stage of that multi-decade cycle, it's now quite consolidated towards the center. And so watching what the center is going to do is essentially part of how you have to manage assets in this type of environment.
How then do we extract ourselves from the centralized pitfalls of our modern economy, where a small group of people determine the price of money itself?
Look, Satoshi had just a beautiful vision, a beautiful dream, and that was, what if we didn't have to trust the banks? And what if we didn't have to save our life savings in a fiat currency that's collapsing in value?
Satoshi Nakamoto inscribed the following headline on the Bitcoin Genesis block in 2009. Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks, which provides a clue to the problem he was trying to solve, having to rely on a trusted third party. And so he created a form of money that requires no trust, no need to worry about a third party's epic lapses in judgment, succumbing to corruption, or perpetuating a rigged system for personal gain at the expense of others' hard work, time, and energy. Bitcoin won't lend out, freeze, or censor your savings. It doesn't need a bailout, and it finally provides a fair and open financial system for securing property rights where anyone can opt in. It's very simple. Don't trust, verify. And short the banks, long Bitcoin.